Hello and welcome to Slate School and our conversation about the Wonderwall, leading creative schools and organizations in an age of complexity with Peter Gamwell. Welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're here. I'm just going to begin by telling you a little bit about Slate School, and then I'll share a little bit about our incredible guest, and then we'll get started. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. The thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm the head of school at Slate School. At Slate School, Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit K-12 school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice and to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to frankly change the landscape of education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, just like today's, are free and open to the public. We are so delighted to have you with us today and to have with us our incredible guest. Born in Liverpool, England, Peter Gamwell is an author, presenter, and an award-winning leader in education who has worked in both Central and Eastern Canada and abroad. He is recently retired from the role of superintendent, otherwise he probably wouldn't have time to be with us tonight, where he was responsible for district leadership development with a 75,000 student Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. He also served there as the board lead for Aboriginal education from 2006 until 2012. His book, The Wonderwall, Leading Creative Schools and Organizations in an Age of Complexity, explores creative schools and has a foreword written by Sir Ken Robinson. So Peter is recognized nationally and internationally, really, as a leader and a catalyst for district-wide initiatives that have inspired and advanced education all over, for students, for faculty, for communities, in business engagement, and also the strength-based models and creative thinking. He's advised academia, the business community, and government departments at all levels on how to develop strategy to imbue creativity throughout an organization, as well as to create environments for optimal learning and engagement. Peter has been invited to sit on the Global Distinguished Leadership Panel at the Canadian Principals Association Conference. He's on the Creativity Expert Panel at the World Creativity Forum in Oklahoma, and he was appointed to the Board of Directors for the US-based National Creativity Network. In his spare time, if you can think that he has any, he plays in a blues and rock band. And in that has been featured as an entertainer on provincial and national radio and television. So maybe if we have time at the end, we'll get to hear a little something.
We got the piano right here. Yeah, no problem.
Fantastic. Is that your instrument, the piano?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Fantastic. I like to play the piano myself, and I always say, when I play, it's Mittens Mountcastle at the keyboard. I love it, but I do play like
what they told me, but it's not pleasant.
Well, welcome, and just thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome.
We were thrilled. We were thrilled to get you. I'm going to say that we are thrilled to get you.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. So, I just want to begin by giving folks kind of the story about the genesis of the Wonderwall. What prompted this? What made you write this book? And what is the Wonderwall all about?
Well, I was in the education system for many, many years. I came from, I probably should tell you, I skipped over the channel when I was 22 years old. In response to an advert that said, in the Times educational supplement, it says, wanted female music teachers for Newfoundland. So I applied and I got the job. So there's a long, long story behind that, but that's absolutely true. So I spent 20 years in the amazing province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And the people there are creative to their very core. They have to be, to have survived in the conditions on that island, because just the weather conditions and the rugged terrain. So I learned so much there. I then skipped over to Ottawa to do a PhD. From the very beginning of my career, and also largely as a result of my own experiences in high school, I have been deeply critical of conventional traditional education. I think, and we'll go into this throughout the next 45 minutes, but I think it misses far too many children, more children than it hits. I think that because of the embedded structures and priorities that are within and upon which it is built, and I use that mechanistic metaphor purposefully, that the priorities serve to damage the students within it, a lot of them. So after many, many years, I tried to shift the system within, and that, again, those stories will come out throughout the process of the next 45 minutes. But basically, I wanted to create a brand new metaphor, and fortunately met with my writing partner, Jane Daly, 10 years ago. And we thought it's one thing to criticize the current model, but how are we going to make the extraordinary happen? So we posed a series of questions to ourselves. One of them was, if we had a blank slate, what would our learning culture, what would be the imperatives grounding our learning culture? And we came up with 3 of those. And then we thought, okay, in order to put the wheels on that, in order to make that happen, what conditions would need to be evident within that learning culture in order to awaken it, to awaken the young minds and the older minds within it, to make the magic happen? And so that's basically what the Wonder Wall is about.
You know what, I want to say to everybody that I love this book, and I'm not going to try to get you to tell every story in it, but no. There are some fantastic stories of just how important education is to humans, and the ways where we've fallen down in our hope to help everyone in that way. And one of those, and I'm hoping you'll talk about it, is about worry, because you reminded me of it when you were saying about when you went to the you were at the car repair shop, and you spoke to.
You did read this book, didn't you?
I did read it. I did. You're at the car repair shop and you're talking to the gentleman, and he said, you failed these guys.
Yes, he did. I will tell the story. So yeah, I go to the car repair shop. It's quite a funny story, because I'm there talking to the younger gentleman at the front, and all of a sudden I hear this voice shouting out from the back, and he said, "Is that a limey voice I hear?" And I said, "What?" And he repeated it. He said, "Is that a limey voice I hear?" So I said, "Yes," I said, "and I would recognize the dulcet tones of an Irishman anywhere." So out he comes. And the 2 of us, of course, like the English and Irish do, we got into it. And he wanted to know then what I did. I'm not sure why I have no idea why he wanted to know, but I said, "I'm in the education system." "Oh yeah, what do you do?" And of course, now I was getting defensive. I didn't know what to say. I said, "Well, I'm a superintendent." Oh, you're one of the higher ups. And he said, "Follow me." So I followed him, and he opened the door to the shop, and there were 5. I think they were all young boys. Although I wouldn't swear to that. And he said, "What do you see there?" I said, "I see 5 young people, engaged in their job." He said, "Do they look engaged, properly engaged to you?" I said, "They do." He said, "That is no thanks to you. That is no thanks to you and your system. You failed these kids. I saved them." anyway, he then went on to talk about how this was common within his auto body system, this understanding that they had tried to reach out to school districts over a period of years to say, look, you've got all sorts of these kids in your schools who are floundering. They're dying 1,000 deaths every day because they like to do things with their hands. So I thought, well, this is a very strange customer appreciation initiative that he's got on the go here. But we had an event coming up in about a month's time. We were bringing together 600 people to explore how can we take what we know about creativity and learning and really deepen it throughout our organization. So I invited him, and sure enough, he and 3 of his friends showed up to this, and they did indeed have their say.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Hmm.
You know, you're right, I did read your book, but I haven't read it twice yet. And I read I read at the beginning, and I think this might be a little unusual for authors, but you just go right out there and you recommend, don't just read it once, read it twice.
We do, yeah.
And you know, I'm wondering what you hope readers will glean from your book on the first read, and what you think they might get on the second. How is it different?
We just wanted them to get their money's worth, Judy. That's all. Let's just
I've already gotten my money's
buy a
worth.
book, you might as well read it again. So when I think of the Wonderwall, I don't think of it so much as a book, as a call to action. As I'd already mentioned, I've always, my heart bleeds for those kids who go through this system who don't fit the system. They just don't. They're either too young for it, their minds aren't in it. We're focusing them on areas of intelligence that right then and there at that point in their lives are not sparking for them. Doesn't mean it never will. But when you do that to a kid day after day, week after week, year after year, it is incredibly damaging. So when I first met Sir Ken, which would have been in 1991, I believe. I know I don't look this old, but I am apparently. And then when I heard later on through that amazing TED talk that he called for fundamental transformation in our learning cultures, I knew precisely what he meant. I'd already been in the system for 16 years myself at that point. So after doing what I could through my own positions within the system, I guess the bottom line is this. The Wonderwall is filled with some, I'm going to be immodest here, it's filled with some very rich and provocative ideas about how we add it's about the imperative for making this transformational shift. And I'm not talking about just dickering around with the system a little tiny bit and make a little change here and this. I refer to it as being in a crisis of upside downity. And I will explain that to you a little later, if I may, because I think it's not the only organization that's upside down. And so I think the reason we wanted people to read twice, because it's in such stark contrast to the conventional status quo. It's a little bit hard for some people to get their heads around. And then a lot of the time people will say, well, how can we make these extraordinary things happen in the context of a current stagnant culture, which is oppressing us in ways and keeping us stifled into a much more conventional way of doing things? That's a very long answer to a very short question.
Yeah, no, but you know what? I think it's I think it illuminated a lot of things for me, and I'm sure for other people too. But what's interesting about it to me is that when I was reading your book, there was a lot of nodding. You know, I was saying, yes, that seems right to me. But now that you're kind of the way you've framed that, I realized that there were a couple of things that I said, but wait a minute. And I went back and I read them again, just in that moment, that little section here or there. And there's just a lot more to the idea that you were talking about. So for example, you were talking about how storytelling and listening are connected to creativity. And immediately I said, oh, well, of course, I'm sure that's true. But the way you talk about it is different. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is the good chance for you to talk about that now. Can you talk about how you're thinking about how those pieces are so important?
So Storytelling then is, again, I just want to repeat this for people so that I keep on hammering home the how it's structured, because one of the things that we knew was if we're writing a book about creativity, oftentimes creativity is conflated with artsy fartsy, up in the air, no structure. Nothing could be further from the truth. But we knew that to address that from the start, we had to embed a very, actually there are a couple of structures which are superimposed onto each other, but the first structure are these 3 imperatives and 4 conditions.
Great, let's go for it.
Sorry?
Yeah, great, let's go for it.
Should I start? Should I just go through the full sequence of them?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So this took many, many years of thinking through, and I've actually, strangely enough, I created a wonder wall, which is over there behind me. I won't bother getting it out now, with sticky things which were movable. And the question that we posed to ourselves first is, okay, what are going to be some of the foundational imperatives, our beliefs about children and learning, and how the learning culture needs to be? And so the first thing we decided was, the first imperative is that there are seeds of brilliance within absolutely everybody. We need to recognize that, we need to value that, and we need to find ways of tapping into it. Conventional, traditional education systems are not founded on that. They're not founded on the belief that it is a seed of brilliance in everybody. They are founded on a hierarchical belief system of human intelligence, with language and math at the top, the arts at the bottom, and other subjects in between. And then that's inbred. I won't go into that now, I'll go into that later. I'll just give the imperative. The second imperative is we need to think and act continuously from a strength-based perspective. All too often, you find that organizations find themselves trapped in deficit thinking. So, and the classic example of this, and I lived this for many years as a superintendent and as a principal before that in another province. When you go to strategic planning meetings, the first question that is posed, and it's always to the hierarchy, it's not often to anything other than the people at the pinnacle of the hierarchy. What are the problems that we have in our organization? And of course, that takes about a day to figure out, because there are so many problems that suddenly the whiteboard becomes a blackboard as it's filled. And of course, the next day they say, well, now how are we going to fix them? In this age of complexity in which we now live, can't do that. The problem is that is modeling a deficit-based approach.
Right.
So now that resonates. There's something called sympathetic resonance, where if you put your foot on the damper pedal on a piano and you sing the note middle C, all of the C's and many other notes start to vibrate in sympathy. And I see this as a sort of a metaphor as to what happens. If you have a deficit approach to thinking in your organization, that resonates out and people start to become deficit. So in the context of a classroom, teacher and children and volunteers and parents, the question becomes, what's the problem with this child?
Right.
And how can we fix it?
Right.
If you flip that question and say, what's the magic in this organization? And how are we going to make that manifest? And then the question at the classroom level becomes, what's the magic in that child? And what conditions are we going to put in place to reveal that? It brings a whole new visual to the thing.
Can I add something here? That we were talking before we went on live, before we went live, and one of the things that we were talking about is how problems, how discomfort, how challenges kind of bring us to creativity. Nobody is creative or doing their very best work when things are comfortable and life is easy.
Yes.
And so it just strikes me so much that when there are problems and challenges in an organization or in a school or for a child or for an adult or whoever, that we're not seeing those as opportunities, because that's where something incredible is about to happen.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There's that wonderful story from Newfoundland that we tell in the book, where the 9/11, when all of the planes landed, and suddenly the population of Gander, Newfoundland exploded. It doubled overnight. They had to put on the Olympics, and not with 4 years warning. They did it overnight. It was incredible. And so what they did that, not through sitting down and pondering about the problem they had in front of them. They just said, wow, how are we going to make this extraordinary? And they did it. And of course,
love in that story that you talk about how everybody played a role that was very specific to their talent.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're looking for in the classroom. That's what we're looking for in business.
Oh,
we all have gifts.
We all do.
You know, we all have gifts.
And they're particular. That's right. So the third imperative then is, if you can get these two woven through the DNA of your district or your organization, whatever it is, there's a seed of brilliance that lies in everybody. Make sure you find ways of recognizing, valuing, tapping into it, and then think from the strength-based perspective. If you can get those working in tandem, you end up with what we think is the most profoundly important aspect of any culture, and that it is a culture of belonging, where people feel important, they feel valued, and it awakens them. So how do you put the wheels on that? So we went to stage 2 and we said, well, and we actually did this we did this massive study as part of our Lead the Way, which I believe we'll probably get to later on. I led this initiative from 2004 to 2016 as the Superintendent of Leadership and Creativity. And about 5 years into it, we posed a question for 2.5 years. What are the conditions under which creative and healthy and individuals and organizations flourish? And we had thousands and thousands of responses, and we actually created a booklet, which I'm actually going to stand up and show you, because I believe I linked it to you. Just a second now.
Yep.
I haven't gone anywhere. Don't panic. It's this booklet. And it's called Unleashing Potential, Harnessing Possibilities. And it actually traces the Lead the Way journey and comes up with the findings of that study. Strangely enough, so then we wanted, 5 or 6 years ago, we thought, well, what are our conditions? And we came up with 4, and strangely, 2 or 3 of them didn't appear through the thousands of conditions that we received through that study. And the first one was storytelling and listening. I think that especially these days, where there is so much noise, so much social media, such a lack of listening, and so much disrespect has emerged as a result of that, I believe. So that for us was our number 1 priority. We need to set up cultures of learning which are characterized by absolute, genuine listening, and allowing people to tell their stories. And secondly, one of the things that's happened through the period of reforms is that there is such a tight rein over curriculum that there is very little room for making learning personal. And I think that would be, if I were the Minister of Education for the world, it would be one of the first things I would do. I would actually totally discard the curriculum, and I would reinvent it. I would reimagine it with lots of other people. And the priority to making this personal would be numero uno, top priority. Because if the learning isn't personal to people, then I'm not sure why it matters that much. And then
Can I just hop in there for just a second, because I think I think, you know, we talk about the learning being personal for the learner, but I mean, what part in that does the teaching being personal for the educator, right? I think when we're talking about the way curriculum has been funneled down through, you know, the layers of folks, it's kind of ended up being everybody's supposed to teach the same way. And in that moment, we're disregarding the gifts of the teachers too.
We absolutely are. None of what I say is meant to be in isolation from the interconnectedness of the whole. Absolutely agree with you totally. And I think it was Yong Zhao who talked about the tendency of systems to want to create sausage factories, make all of the kids sort of the same sausage, and it goes the same for teachers. I mean, I have a lot of, I fostered a lot of friendships and collegiality through the 40 odd years that I was in, and I to this day have teachers, educational assistants, parents calling me up and saying, this is just stifling. It's very, very difficult to feel creative or valued when basically you're told what to do. So yeah, it needs to be personal for everybody, and it's
Your
possible.
comment just brought the sun out in North Haven, Connecticut. Okay, I'm sorry I interrupted. Go ahead. That was beautiful.
The third condition for us is a movement from diversity to inclusivity. That might sound a bit odd, but having worked in many, many different organizations, it's so easy for organizations to point to a document, which is their policy document on diversity. And it's one of the most insulting things I could possibly think of. But if you can make that shift from diversity to true inclusivity by listening to people and hearing their stories, you can't really come up with a policy document, a policy and procedure on that. That has to be lived through the DNA.
Yeah.
And finally, there has to be a condition of celebration. And I don't mean meeting every 6 weeks to give out certificates to some children and not others. I mean, it has to be infused right through the DNA. There needs to be joy and celebration throughout the organization. And when that happens, it's magical.
Wow. You know, one of the things that's great in your book is that you don't just offer us these ideas that are and I don't want to say that they're impossibly difficult, because they're actually things that we ought to be knowing, and we ought to know better already. We ought to be doing these things, and how we turned away from them is probably another very long education idea lab that I don't even know if we want to get into that.
I think we have to actually. I think that it's deeply systemic, it's deeply intentional, and I think it's all about control. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. I just you know, what I love about the book is that you offer very just very simple ways to try this out, to make these moves yourself. It's not you know, I read a lot of books, and there are so many wonderful people out there thinking about education and working hard at understanding where we should be going next, and why we should be making moves now and not waiting or whatever. But they sometimes don't give us practical things that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And in your book, I love that you give us, you know, practical things that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to mention one because, you know, the Idea Lab has become an incredible tool for professional development for all of us at Slate School, and now for as many as 160,000 people who have tuned in to watch them. And I love that you, in the book, you talk about how if you want to have really good professional development, you'll ask everybody who's in professional development to bring somebody else.
That's right.
Along. Can you talk about that and what brought you to say that?
It was very controversial. One of the first things, I've got to contextualize this with a little story, right?
Great.
Not that I tell stories very much, but I'll tell this one. In 2004, I was appointed the position of superintendent with responsibility of leadership and creativity, and it was made very clear to me that the director at the time wanted things shaken up. So I called a friend of mine, Frank, but she wasn't really that friendly at the time, but I'd heard him speak a few times because I'm pretty new to Ottawa at this point. And I asked him if he wouldn't mind working with me. So we brainstormed and we thought, what we'll do is we'll bring together 24 people from across the organization. So we had we had two people from each employee group. So all of the employee groups were involved. So you had superintendents sitting next to custodians, sitting next to educational assistants, sitting next to teachers. Okay, 24 people, and we gave them 3 readings. The first was a book on shared and distributed leadership. It was a chapter. The second was about emotional intelligence in leadership, and the third one was Margaret Wheatley's Principles of Community, which are just remarkable. And at the end of it, we divvied the readings up, and then they shared ideas. And I asked a simple question: what does leadership mean to you? And there was a deafening silence in the room. I thought, well, that's strange. So I asked it again. And again, there was a few mumblings. And then it dawned on me, they're not used to this. Superintendents are not used to sitting next to, on an equal level, next to custodians who clean the schools. And so nothing happened until the very end, when this gentleman at the back of the room, put his hand up and said, "Peter, why am I here?" And I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Why am I here?" And I said, "Well, the whole point of this is that we're trying to come up with a narrative of leadership which resonates with everybody. Because if it doesn't resonate with everybody, what's the point of having it?" And he said to me, "Well, Peter, I've been in this school district for 20 years, and nobody has ever told me that my voice is important." This is Mike, and Mike was a custodian in a high school. And that broke open the discussion. That was our catalyst. Now we knew we had to move ahead with something. And that's what catalyzed the entire Lead the Way. So then we did this massive study of the whole district. We thought, if that's what he's thinking, how many others are thinking like this? So we did this massive study, and we got told in no uncertain terms that we had to do some serious thinking about the trust and about the perception of hierarchies within our culture.
Incredible. It's funny. I know these stories aren't related in the book. I don't even think they're close to each other, but just that moment of collaborating with people that have very different lenses and very different points of view around the same purpose.
Yes.
Is I think not so far afield from the experience you recount about the production of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, you're right.
I think there are things that those two stories have in common, and I would love to hear about, what are we to learn from that story of Jesus Christ Superstar, and then finally I'm going to ask the big question: are there ways to recreate that experience? So maybe you'll tell us a little bit about it, and then address those ideas.
Okay, the timing of this is sort of very interesting. Our second book is just out. We've just finished it, and it's in the hands of the publishers. And a remarkable thing happened. Maybe I'll start off by saying this. It was in 1984, I think it was, that I'd just been hired on by a Catholic school in Gander, Newfoundland. And I think 6 months in, one of the teachers there approached me and said, "Do you fancy putting off a rock opera?" And I said, "Sure, what do you think?" And he said, "Jesus Christ Superstar." I said, "We're in a Catholic school. I'm a non-Catholic. What, are you trying to get me fired?" He said, so anyway, we did this production, and it was probably one of the most profound professional experiences of my life, as we had these hundreds of kids involved. And the one thing I think that we got, well, we got many things right. One of the things that I think we got really right is that the doors were open to absolutely anybody. If kids wanted to be, the only time we auditioned was for the lead roles, because of course you can't have kids on stage embarrassing themselves. But if they wanted to be in the choir and they couldn't sing, it didn't matter. They could join the woodworking team. They could join backstage works. They could do the lighting, sound. It didn't matter. They could
Can't
dance.
do a play without all of those people. You need all of those people to do a play.
That's right. And so yeah, it went on to be an incredibly successful, and we tell the full story in the next book. And the reason is this: 2 years ago, around Easter, NBC put on a production of Jesus Christ Superstar. John Legend was in the lead role. And about half an hour after that, I got an email, and it said, I'm hoping this is the Peter Gamwell who led the production of Jesus Christ Superstar 37 years ago. And he went on to say, if it is, and then I'm not even going to say what he said because it moved me to tears. It was one of those moments when you have no idea the impact that you'd had. And this guy, who he's given me permission to tell the story, he will be in the book, but it knocked me backwards that I had had such a profound impact on this young boy's life. He was just he was working backstage. And as he said to me, in retrospect, he was a bit of a scoundrel in those days, and he was going through a very difficult time. And apparently I took the time to take him aside and line him up a couple of times. And, it's like, you've got a decision to make here. But he then followed up with several other emails. And the reason I wouldn't tell the story for a long time, because I didn't want people to think I'm telling it, oh, look how great he was as a teacher. But the reason I was convinced to tell it by my co-author was, as teachers, I sometimes think we underestimate the power and the impact that we have on those young minds. And we can't forget that, because it's just as he remembered that as a positive impact. Sometimes I think we do things, albeit maybe not necessarily thoughtfully, but to really damage those young people. And those memories reach on just as powerfully as his fortunately positive memory did.
Yes. Well, it is an incredibly powerful experience to have somebody reach back and speak to you. And I think it's important that you tell that story. I'm glad you're telling it, because I think you're right. We do need to be reminded. So many times the work that we do, the response to it is so long. The lead time is so long. You plant a seed and then you wait for years and years, and sometimes you don't know how it grew. And so I think it's really important.
One of just to connect the two things, though, the Superstar example and the Lead the Way events.
Yes.
Boy, was it a powerful learning experience for me, because once this got out into the community, the enormity of what we were doing, I had the base commander called me one day and said, in the movie, there's a military scene. Are you going to do it that way? I said, we may well. He said, would you like me to send down a squadron and they'll teach your kids the military maneuvers? We had the bank offering us money. We had, a lady called me up one day and said, we've heard you're doing Superstar. Would you like your costumes made? And I said, well, who are you? She said, well, I'm the president of the Gander Stitch and Bitch Society.
What?
They made every costume. I mean, Broadway standard costumes. So it was amazing. That's what I learned. That's what I took with me. The school walls are just imaginary. And once you get rid of them and bring community in, magic happens.
there are a few things that I'm looking at the clock and that I want to absolutely hit on before we're just indelicately ended here, and one of those, maybe I'm jumping around a little bit. Please forgive me, but I love this term, in-betweenity.
So do
And can you explain in-betweenity to me?
Yeah, I hope so. It's actually a phrase that I heard from my dear friend and mentor, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, Dr. Bobby Moore, one of the most intriguing, brilliant minds I've ever come across. And it's funny, I'm going to actually read, he came and spoke in Newfoundland, and it was there maybe in the early 90s that he said this, that he says that we're living in a state of in-betweenity. That's how he phrased it. That is to say, our lives are in a parenthesis between two historical eras. One of them is dying, but its devotees procrastinate over performing the last rites. The other one is in the pains of birth, but its welcomers can't find the right midwife. So we had this beautiful, fluid, and metaphoric way of describing this. But so basically, in-betweenity are those periods of time when the realities of one era are being superseded by the emergent realities of the new era. And it's usually a time of great turbulence and challenge. And the more Jane and I thought about this, as we wrote about it in The Wonderwall, what we state is that this has happened thousands of times through human history. And we actually say in The Wonderwall, as we're musing about what are some of the causes of this, and we actually come out and say, pandemic. So we were a little bit visionary.
Yeah. Yes.
And
wow.
as you've seen, what a time of in-betweenity, what an exemplar of in-betweenity pandemic is. But in-betweenity, or what we call stages of complexity, ages of complexity, are really characterized by complexity, by messiness, by turbulence, but also, because of need, creativity. We had an ice storm in Gander about, 15, 20 years ago, and it went on for a long, long time, and it paralyzed the city. The number of wonderful initiatives that emerged through that, where people just had to come up with stuff to help their neighbors, and they had to do it in a way which conventionally they wouldn't have been allowed to do because of bylaws and this and that. And it just flourished. And you've just seen the same thing in the pandemic, right? So my question is, if we can reach those levels of creative awakening during times of complexity, why can't we do it during regular school days? And the answer, of course, is that we can. And that's what the second book gets into.
Wow. I can't wait. I can't wait. One of the sections of one of the chapters in the book is see learning as difference that makes a difference.
Can I take you back before we go there?
Yeah, totally.
I'm sorry.
No, please do.
What Bobby then says about in-betweenity is, what's really intriguing about in-betweenity is people's response to in-betweenity. And he talks about how people living in a condition of in-betweenity, I'm actually going to read this little bit because I want to make sure I don't misquote him. They do one of three things. They either rearrange the furniture of the status quo, hoping that by giving weight to different pieces, the turbulence will go away, or they take a strictly linear view of life, projecting current trends into the future. However, if you take a look at those current trends, they're only ones to which they really adhere. So in other words, like the first group, they are desperate to hold on to the status quo. And then the third group, these are the people that see the enveloping uncertainties as a challenge to their imagination and their will, and they proceed to use both to give desirable shape to the surging raw energies of the new era. When I'm doing workshops on this with people, long workshops, I spend a lot of time on that. and have people go into themselves. They don't have to share back, but usually they do, as to where they see of themselves on that continuum. And the reason that is so important is that as teachers and leaders, we better have self-knowledge about that, because we are living in a time of complexity and we do need the courage to do things differently.
Yes, yes, we do. So there are two things I want to talk about. I'd love to hear what you mean about this difference that makes a difference. E-learning is difference that makes a difference, but I also want you to talk about flow. And I'll let you pick what you'd like to do first, but I want everybody to hear about both of those things.
Okay. So difference that makes a difference is actually a definition of learning that is told by one of the thinkers who's most influenced my life, a guy called Gregory Bateson. He wrote a book called Steps to an Ecology of Mind. And I'm going to illustrate this by saying this, that the title of our next book, we think, because it changed in the last 2 days, and I'd also like some feedback to see if people think it's a good title, is going to be Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, New Pedagogies for Cultivating Every Student's Innovation. I'll say that again. Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, New Pedagogies for Cultivating Every Student's Innovation. And it certainly illustrates this idea of moving from thinking about something, dreaming about something, to doing something that matters to the people who are doing it. The very best learning cultures that I've worked with have this at their center. They seek to have their students to see, and by the way, the adults working with them, to see themselves as change makers. People who want to make a difference in the world. Maybe it's their world, maybe they're looking inwardly to try to understand themselves better, or maybe it's a difference in the world of their own community, or maybe in some cases they're looking out around the world to make a difference. But unless it's difference that makes a difference, I'm not so sure it matters. And so we wanted to give that. I had an opportunity to, how long have we got?
We've got 13 minutes, but I'm willing to go over.
I got 3 years ago, I got an email from Calgary, Alberta, and subsequently to a CEO of a change organization and a superintendent with the school district flew down to meet with me. And they had a copy of the book, and they had lots of yellow sticky things. They'd clearly done what you've done, and that's read the thing better than I have. Anyway, they said to me, before we leave, we want you to sign a contract to come out to Strathmore, Alberta, it was, and work with, I think it was upwards of 40 schools and departments, and make this change, make this happen. They'd already been on professional development initiatives for many years, but now they wanted to bring the lens of creativity to it. So I did sign on the dotted line and went into a panic for several weeks, thinking, because it was going to be, I was going to do 4 full days with them, and then they would embed me in their schools and departments, which was fantastic. But this was a real example of a system wanting to make a difference that made a difference, and what a difference it was. So we ended up on the last day with a celebration of the extraordinary, where they all brought in artifacts. I'm a great believer in the creation of artifacts, and it could be a small story that's working with a small group of kids, or community based, but that's what they've done over the 16-month period. It's one of the most moving examples of difference that makes a difference that I've had the fortune to be involved with.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal. Is there a way for us to distill that? I mean, there are a lot of places that don't have 16 months or the ability to have you in. Can we follow these 3 imperatives and 4 conditions? Can we make this happen just from just from reading a book, or what do we really need to do?
So in the next book, I have been extraordinarily generous, and I mean it. So I actually tell that story in a chapter, and it's almost autobiographical. I take you through all of the stages of how you actually make this happen.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's very detailed, and then I tell. The book is framed around 8 stories which I've been involved with, and it's very detailed. It's sort of a how-to.
Great. So can we now we've backed up, and we've taken the lens way out, and we've thought about, district-wide change, and I hope worldwide change. I mean, I'm excited for one school at a time and one district at a time, but only as it leads to change for all of us, because too often change comes to a few.
That's right.
And we need to make sure that this kind of education is available to everybody.
We do.
But I want to now focus in again, because I think that this concept of flow is something that's so important, because I think you described it so well, that people really, it's kind of, it continues to be magical, but it's somewhat demystified in the way you talk about it.
Yes, there's nothing magical about it. It is magical, but it's the holy grail of learning. It's what every teacher, every parent needs to try to, and it's all about getting the conditions right. It's all about opening children's and adults' minds. Let's start with children. It's opening children's minds to the possibilities of what fascinates them. What are they curious about? What would they like to do? What are they passionate about? And continually moving with them, because sometimes when you set up Genius Hour project and you say, what are you passionate about? There's this blank look on the children's faces, and not to mention the teachers, because they're not used to that. Our structures don't allow for that. So that's what we have to change. But flow, it's that amazing experience when the learning is so profoundly deep that time simply flies past. You feel a sense of oneness. Actually, sometimes you don't feel a sense of anything. You look at your watch and you go, whoa, where did that go? And the beauty of flow is that I don't think I've ever come across anybody who hasn't experienced it, but it's always for a different reason. I'll never forget asking a group of retired professionals at a talk I was giving, and I asked, when have you experienced flow? And this guy starts to explain how, as a young scientist, he was looking in a microscope and watching fish hatch. He was watching, and he starts to cry, telling me about it. I mean, and that's not unusual when people start to describe what it is that gets them into that state of flow. So yeah, that's the magic. It is the holy grail of learning. Sometimes it's lamentable. One of the privileges of being a superintendent, you get to go into many different schools and school environments. And it's funny, you wouldn't even have to move across the threshold of a classroom before you knew something magical was going on there. There was just a sense of something intangible. And one of the curious things about it is that when you did cross the threshold, nobody knew, nobody took any notice of you, because they were so focused on what they were doing. Sadly, you can go down in the next classroom, look in, and there's just an air of unhealth. The kids are disengaged, they're draped over their desk, and it's sad. So the question is, how can we make sure that we maximize this opportunity to foster those awakened cultures of learning? And the best that Jane and I have come up with at the moment are these 3 imperatives and 4 conditions, although we push that a lot more. And in the next book, we come up with leadership characteristics, we call them, which I think you'll find very interesting.
I like the way you're talking about this so much, because I know from experience that when we find something that that works for one class, one teacher, one group, our immediate response too often is to try and replicate that.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And well, go ahead. You please take it from there.
Well, the other thing that concerns me a little bit is that you see, one of the things we say in the book is that how shifting the apostrophe can change the world. A vast amount of the professional development, in fact, it's a cottage industry, is all about if you use these learning strategies in your classroom for your students, and by the way, the S is after the apostrophe is after the S, for your students, you will increase their test scores.
Right.
First of all, I really don't care about test scores, and we don't even mention them in the Wonderwall.
I noticed.
But that is a case of upside downity. I don't want, when my grandchildren go to school, I don't want them to be seen as one of the collective. Not at all. So if you shift the apostrophe back and say, how can we get the best out of our students with the apostrophe in front of the S, that forces personalization. And that, to me, is what we need to do. Simple shifts, simple metaphors, but very powerful.
Peter, I wonder if you have some advice to the superintendents out there. I think this past year there's been no worse job than superintendent of a public school district. I mean, my heart went out to them. It was an impossible task. But I wonder, returning to school this year, what words of wisdom do you have for them?
I'd advise them to listen. I would advise them to listen very carefully to the stories that they are going to hear from their staff, from parents, from the community. It's going to be an exhausting task, but just in that empathetic mode of listening and accepting and hearing out story, I think that goes a long, long way to calming situations.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hope they'll listen, and then I hope they'll be brave and act.
Absolutely.
Because I think the things that the initiatives that you've described, and you describe even more fully in the Wonderwall, they were brave. They're brave.
Yeah, and
I'm sure there were people who thought, don't do this. You shouldn't do this.
Oh, I mean, I have very personal stories of I made it all sound very easy leading this thing for 12, 13 years. Some of the response to me was nothing less than hostile. It was, oh no, don't feel sorry for me. I'm from Liverpool. We're pretty good at dealing with that. But I'm not joking. If once you put your head up and put your hand up and say, we need to be doing things differently. The status quo does not like that. And you need to have an intestinal fortitude. And the way through that is through bonding with like-minded people, but not in a way that excludes others. Always open the doors to inclusivity, but always have those wonderful, wonderful supportive. I see it as a web of support. I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of formal leaders fall into. They think of themselves as formal hierarchical leaders. It doesn't need to be that way. I think throughout all of my experience as a formal leader, I may have had to use my formal leadership power, if you will, maybe 0.1% of the time. The rest of it, the degrees to which I could be successful, was entirely contingent on how the web of support was in place for all of us.
Well, I hope they can do that, because I think we could use some more of you around the world right now. I think people need it. I'm going to ask a soft question now at the end. because I love the way you talk about what we can learn from palm trees. And I think this is the time for that, maybe.
Well, it actually ties in very well with the last question. I think there are two answers to that. I think in the book, we're talking about how in ages of complexity, when, you know, the prevailing winds are strong, if you try to stand like an oak, eventually it's not going to work. You need to be able to bend and shift and move as an organization and be responsive and listen and show that empathetic side and ensure that your culture is imbued with the types of characteristic that make it open for people's individual and group and organizational creativity. Allow ideas to be awakened all the time. And I would say the same thing about formal leaders. I've come across an awful lot of formal leaders in my time, and some of them were more like the oak tree in the palm. They saw themselves as very individualistic, very firm, very strong. And generally speaking, they're the ones that didn't do very well. It was the people who did have that capacity to shift and bend. And it's not that you're changing your center. No, you know what your center is, but you need to dance. You need to dance around that center and sway, and that's what will keep you healthy and keep those wonderful support systems around you. We all need those support systems. So that's what I would say to people. Don't keep things in. Do not keep things in. That is a road to unhealth. Maybe I'll finish with this. I read a wonderful, wonderful definition of health from living systems theory about 35 years ago. And for the life of me, I can't find where it is. It says this: the health of any system is absolutely dependent on the delicate and intricate balance of the subsystems within the system overall. Once any one of the subsystems, and it can be a physical, a chemical, a human, a social system, it doesn't matter. Same principle applies. Once one of the subsystems goes out of balance, pathology sets in place through the health of the whole system. And when you look at that in terms of classrooms and organizations, it all comes down to that taking care of each other, taking care of the subsystems within the system. Because without that health, with that form of health and beautiful culture in place, you're much more likely to have awakened cultures of creative learning.
Incredible. Peter, this has been too quick an hour. And I hope that there will be a time for you to come and visit Slate School.
I absolutely do. I've done a lot of, actually, there's a chapter about Connecticut in the book. I'd love to come down again. Come
on down. We would love to have you for a visit. We're trying to do so many of the things that you're talking about, and we'd love to share what we're doing and talk with you more, learn more.
Absolutely.
So thank you from all of us here at Slate School, and thank you on behalf of all of the people that were tuned in tonight. It was an incredible hour, and we are so grateful to you for your experience and for being generous enough to share the work with us. And we are gonna, I want to, one quick thing, I want to direct friends to hear more from you on your YouTube channel. Can you tell us give us
what I'll do is I will send you the link to it.
Perfect.
It's going to be called, but if they want to get to me, my Twitter account is Peter Gamwell.
Great. And
you can email me at peter@petergamwell.com.
Awesome. And this is the book. Look for it everywhere, and then look for the next one. Yeah. It's worth it, 100%. Thank you again. And I'm just going to close the way we close all of our meetings here at Slate School by wishing everyone positive rice wherever you are. Be good, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks so much, Julie. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Good night.